everybody. So my name is Empire Ship. You can call me Empy. This is Death and Taxes, any percent. It is a deathless run. So I wanted to provide people with just a small little guide on how to file your tax return, because the timing is great for it. It is literally right before filing season, and this is actually something that people are interested in for some reason. So I'm really glad that you're here right now. If you're watching the VOD or if you're watching live, I super appreciate you being here. This is a topic that a lot of people don't want to think about, that I'm going to try my best to make it a little bit easier to think about, so thank you. So what gives me the authority to talk about taxes compared to everybody else? So I'm not going to disclose who I work for because I like staying safe, and I don't want to give you the equivalent of dude, trust me, but my job does involve resolving individual taxpayer issues when it comes to filing tax returns. So I live and breathe this stuff. I have so much information that lives in my head rent-free. I want to make sure that I can share that information with people. So a lot of the information that I'm going to talk about, I also have like a ton of sources at the end that you yourself can go to, but it is my job to know where all of this stuff lives so you don't have to. So I definitely am like the equivalent of like Charlie Day and Always Sunny talking about the mail, except I'm talking about tax returns. So hope you appreciate it. So a couple things to get out of the way. First thing first, like this is a very serious topic, so I have to have a small serious blurb here. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a financial advisor. This is not legal or financial advice. I'm not here to tell you how to do your taxes specifically, but I am here to talk about how to do taxes in general. I'm here to arm you with research on specifically the US federal income tax return. So if you file state returns, some of this might be useful, but that's kind of out of scope for today. And there's also a lot of like non-resident or people who live outside the US. Like a lot of those cases are very few and far between, and unfortunately, there's only so much time. So this is purely about the Form 1040 and its related forms and schedules. Do your own research. I kind of mentioned that already. Like there's a lot of links to the IRS website already. Sorry, I keep putting the mouse on the screen. But the key here is like making sure that you have the information that is already there, that has been there this whole time, that nobody is ever informed about, unfortunately, so that you can go and do your own research and do things the way that works best for you. Also, it's a government entity. There's a lot of acronyms. It's what they do. They love their acronyms. I'll do my best to define as much as possible here, but there is a lot. Second, this is not a forum for political discussion. I know the system is flawed. I know that there are so many ways that we can change it. I'm here to tell you how to play the current game, not the games that are to come. Also, I don't really do this often, so like, please be patient with me. Sorry, again, the mouse. I really hope that does not actually show on screen. Let me try and fix that. There we go. We're mostly going to be talking about filing 2025 tax returns. I know that nobody should have filed their 2025 tax return by now because the filing season literally has not started. If you have already gotten your income documents for this year, how? But because a lot of this information is still really new, like literally a lot of like the links to forms and instructions and stuff literally just got uploaded to the irs.gov today. So some information might be from 2024 still, but a lot of it kind of is the same throughout the years. So just be wary of that. Also the fact that laws and instructions and forms change all the time. So if you're watching this in the future, or if you go back on this information in the future, just be aware, like some of this might have changed by then. Like again, going back to the whole do your own research thing, like things change all the time, just be mindful. Lastly, I know that I am talking about filing your tax return, and I generally like to think that I am a good source of information for it, but don't give anybody claiming to be an employee for the IRS your social security number or your other personally identifiable information. Always make sure that the source is like from the IRS or any other like tax body. They will never send you correspondence as a text message or an email asking you for personal information. 99% of the time, IRS correspondence is going to be a notice in the mail, which I know is not always the fastest, but it is a paper documentation, so it's easier to trace. So just make sure you're always being vigilant when it comes to stuff like that. So the agenda. Shouts to Dorian Electra for one of the most banger albums in the last couple of years. Couple topics, just like I said, it's a lot to go through in 1 hour, so some of these might be a little bit shorter than I would have liked. You're going to see where I start to run out of time on putting this information on here. I do plan to make revisions to this slideshow as time goes on because, again, things change, and I'd like to be able to provide something that's like a bit more of a source for anyone in general. So prior to this panel, a few people might have seen on social media, I sent out a form for people to submit just asking 2 basic questions. What's your primary source of income? What do you struggle the most with filing your tax return? It is anonymous, so I don't know who submitted these answers, but I do have the statistics of what was answered. And I thought that would be interesting to look at. So this is the first one so I had 39 responses, which is awesome. A good majority of people receive their income from an employer, which is the Form W-2 that you would receive no later than January 31st. Nobody through like investment income or dividends or capital gain, but a few others who are like contractors, self-employment, so people who are Twitch streamers or artists for a living. Good for you guys. I do not envy you having to fill out a Schedule C or more than one Schedule C every year. We'll talk about it. So the other question was, what do you struggle the most when filing a tax return? The Google form did not give me a really good graph for this, so please enjoy this picture of my cats to fill the space. And it's a lot of information because people could select more than one issue at the same time, because I knew that people would have more than one issue with filing their tax return. So this is not singular. So a small breakdown of everything. One of the primary struggles was just how to do the math of the whole thing, which is completely understandable. Most people primarily receive their income from a Form W-2. Some of the other categories that people could write their own responses for discuss how do you take the itemized deduction versus the standard deduction? Just a brief mention of that, the itemized deduction is generally if you A, make a lot of income, and B, pay a lot of state, local taxes, health, medical expenses, gifts, and contributions to charity. So anytime you see something about charity saying, hey, your donation is tax deductible, that's what it's talking about, the itemized deduction. But you can only take one or the other. Most people generally get a higher standard deduction than an itemized deduction, so that's why the itemized deduction is less talked about. But we will mention it briefly. One of the things that did get mentioned once or twice is the issues that people have paying either state or local taxes, especially when it comes to moving from one state to another. I've had to deal with that too. Unfortunately, those are state taxes and a little bit out of scope of my understanding, so we're not going to talk about it here, sorry. So first things first, everything is going to be okay. So I know a lot of people there's definitely a lot of portrayal both in history and in media of e-standard revenue officer coming to bust down somebody's door because they forgot to pay their taxes or something like that. That is not really what happens. So this is Yoshi. Yoshi is known for his history of tax evasion, and he commits tax fraud. It is a commonly known thing, and that is probably why the SMW community considers him to be a tool to be used and then discarded. And that's probably also how he continues to evade his taxes, because he keeps telling the IRS that he has died in a pit of lava. But Here's the difference between you and Yoshi. Willfulness. You get it? Because he's full of will. Thank you. Thank you. I worked very hard on that one. So here's what actual tax fraud looks like. Again, it is the willfulness and intentional wrongdoing. Like, you have to be going out of your way to not pay taxes. There's a difference between avoidance of tax and tax evasion. Tax evasion is a criminal offense. It defines it as above. I am not going to read that whole thing, I'm sorry. But when it comes to tax avoidance, that is like within legal means, like that is you claiming tax credits that you're eligible for, or deductions, legitimate like reduction of your taxes that you owe based on your income. So like the difference is intent, and the burden of proof is on the IRS for this one. Like if there is any issue with what you owe for taxes, it is not willful on your behalf, or I would hope so at the very least. You would know. If you forget to pay your taxes, there are a bajillion notices that will go out about it to you, and many ways to help resolve that. That is not a revenue officer busting down your door. So I wanted to get that out of the way first. Like, do not worry. That is not something that happens to the average person when they are not intentionally avoiding the payment of taxes. So the Form 1040, that's the tax return. That's the big honking thing. Most people will file using tax prep software or with a preparer, so people generally don't see the actual Form 1040 itself. You're usually taken through like a questionnaire style thing that asks the same questions that a tax return would ask, except it's in a extremely hard to look at line by line form. So definitely worth looking at if that's how you file your taxes, because then you get familiar with what that information is actually doing and where it goes on the return, because that also helps you kind of figure the math, because it does show everything chronologically of like each number, and now you add some of those numbers, and now you subtract one line from another, and I really should have brought water with me because now my mouth is getting dry. So top of the Form 1040, your entity, your filing status. This is generally like most people know this information in the first place. It is your name, like first, middle, and last. That is not my legal first, middle, and last name, as much as people would like to think so. And that is the address of AGDQ 2026, and not my social. If I filed with a spouse, then a spouse's name would be on the line below that. Some of the information I am skipping right now. Hey, question. The stream, does it show the mouse?
It does.
Oh, excellent. This is helpful then, because I was so looking forward to like having oh my God, you are a godsend. I just received not one, but 2 glasses of water. So, one thing I should point out is we're going to ignore a lot of these lines. I know I kind of said we would go through this line by line, and we're going to talk about what most people fill out, but just so you know what it means. Most people are calendar year filers, meaning your tax year is January 1st to December 31st of a specific year. Some people are fiscal year filers, and we are not talking about those today. But if you are a fiscal year filer, this is where you are inputting when your tax year starts and when your tax year ends. So for example, you could have a fiscal year that starts April 1st, 2025 and ends March 31st, 2026. Had to think about that for a second. At the top of the return is also if you are filing on behalf of a deceased taxpayer, or if your spouse is deceased, there is a spot at the top because that information is important for the tax return. It kind of helps the IRS determine where the refund is actually supposed to go to. And also that information is shared with Social Security. And then filing status. Oh yeah, also more things that we're kind of ignoring here. So the presidential election campaign, this is probably something that when you go through the questionnaire thing, it doesn't even mention because it's really only on the tax form and nothing else. If you want $3 to go to the presidential election campaign, it doesn't come from your refund. It doesn't increase your balance due. It's just saying, hey, do you want to send a free $3 to this thing? That's all that is. So filing status. The main ones are single, married filing separately, married filing jointly, and head of household. I do not live with anybody else and I am not married, so I file as single. But there are different ways to figure out what your filing status actually is. If you were married on the last day of 2025, then your filing status for 2025 is one of the two married filing statuses. Married filing jointly combines all of your income, but also all of your tax liability. If one of you has a greater tax liability than the other, or one of you pays a greater amount of taxes throughout the year than the other, then that may affect what your total refund or balance due is. So sometimes one of the reasons people would file separately is if one person, based on their income and the amount of tax they would normally owe or how much payments they have made toward their tax through their withholding, for example, if that would result in a refund, but the other spouses would result in a tax due, then that can sometimes be a reason why somebody files separately. But one thing to note is if you file separately, if one of you itemizes, both of you have to itemize. So just something to watch out for. Like your deduction has to either be standard or itemized between the both of you. So good luck with that. There are sources to like how to determine your filing status and whether or not you should itemize versus take the standard deduction. Like I said, not a lot of time to go through all of this, a lot of information to go through. I have so many links at the end that are definitely worth checking out for much further details. So remember the filing status thing because that's going to come important later. The tiny little digital assets line at the top. If you deal with crypto, then you might have to select the yes box on here. But if you don't deal in crypto, then you're almost always checking the no box. The Form 1040 instructions is a massive PDF of so many pages, but it's absolutely worth looking at. For some reason, the 2025 Form 1040 instructions are not on irs.gov yet, but the 2024 instructions still have a lot of really good information on a lot of these lines. So the dependent section, this is actually laid out a little bit differently than it used to be, so I'm still getting used to how this looks. If you can claim dependents, this is where they would go. You would input their name, their social, their relationship to you, because a dependent is not always a qualifying child. A qualifying child is not always a qualifying child is not always a dependent. You can also have qualifying relatives that are not your children that qualify as dependents, but only for certain credits. So this is kind of where all of that gets accounted for. There are tests for determining who can be claimed as a dependent. And by whom, because I know that is often a huge issue, especially for people who are separated and the parents have to then determine who's actually claiming the child on their tax return. Generally, it is somebody who lives with you for more than half of the time during the year. If they are a student in college, for example, that is one of the exceptions. If they would normally be living with you, if they weren't currently at college, then they do meet the more than half the year requirement. And they have to not be providing more than half of their own support. So for example, at age 19, when I lived at my mom's house still, I did live with her for more than half of the year because I lived under her roof the entire year, but I paid for more than half my things. So she couldn't claim me as a dependent. And that meant that I, in turn, was no longer checking the box that says that somebody is claiming me as a dependent. And that changes your your standard deduction because of like how your income is accounted for. So this is going to be important later for a lot of things, but I do not have any dependents, so I did not fill that out. I'm sorry. Again, more information can be found in the instructions. This is just general information. So next part of the Form 1040, income. So there's a lot of lines that have to do with income. The main one for everybody who gets their income from an employer with a W-2 is line 1A. This is where your income lives. This is box 1 of your Form W-2, or if you have multiple employers and get multiple W-2s, or if you are married and your spouse also gets a Form W-2, it's everything combined. Everything that's in box 1, all combined. There are a few other things that sometimes your employer accounts for on the Form W-2 or some other separate form. So like Medicaid waiver payments, that's generally a state thing, so you may have to get that information from your state. Or tip income that's not reported on line 1A, even though tips should generally be included with your Form W-2 when you receive that information from an employer. All of that added up then goes on to line 1Z, so that's your W-2 income. And then we get into other weird sources of income, like if you have a savings account that gets interest on the amount that's in there, you probably have either tax exempt or taxable interest that gets reported to you on a 1099 INT. Be aware, some of these forms that are mentioned here, payers are not required to send you these forms if they are under a certain dollar threshold. So if you have accounts with various financial institutions, you may have to account for this yourself. But generally, they will send you a form for these. If you invest in stocks, you may earn dividends, so you get a 1099 DIV. If either of those are over $1,500, you may need to attach something called a Schedule B that kind of accounts for all of the sources of these interest and dividends. If you're enrolled in an IRA, those distributions show up in a Form 1099-R. Each of these forms also, like the boxes on those forms will tell you stuff like tax-exempt interest. So you will plug the information from that box into 2A. Or qualified and ordinary dividends. You then plug the information from those 1099 DIVs into those boxes. IRA distributions have some weird different rules depending on if it's just a rollover from one IRA to another, or if you make too much. You can actually do too much of a contribution to your IRAs, so you could be taxed on any excess contributions, or if you take less than you are supposed to every year from your IRA at a certain age. There's something called a required minimum distribution. If you do not take if you end up taking less than that required minimum distribution, you may end up receiving some sort of tax penalty on that. So just when it comes to money from IRAs, just be careful about what you are putting in and taking out. It's a little bit tricky and definitely worth like just paying extra special attention to. But just something to watch out for. If you receive like pension and annuities, that also can come to you on a 1099-R, kind of reported under the same boxes. Usually they are labeled. If you receive Social Security benefits or disability or anything like that, that'll come to you on a Form 1099, or sorry, SSA 1099. I don't know why the letters for that one come before the numbers. Social Security has to be special, I guess. On that note, I know we're mostly talking about like federal tax returns and the IRS here, but worth checking your account through ssa.gov to make sure that your income and your sources of employment are properly reported there, because if they are not, then that may mess with your Social Security benefits. So once you do reach the age where you can start taking your Social Security benefits monthly, you want to make sure it's actually accounting for the Social Security benefits that had been paid into it from your employers. So just worth looking at because it'll show you like all this last several years that you have had an employer that has paid into Social Security benefits. Capital gain or loss. This is a weird one that I don't personally have any experience with because I do not have any capital assets that I buy or sell. But generally, like if you have like stocks or bonds, the IRS is only going to know how much you sold them for, so they're only going to know your gains. They're not going to know your losses. So it's important to account for those on the Schedule D and or the Form 8949 because that'll show you like, here's the stock that I sold, here's how much it was when I bought it, here's how much it was when I sold it, here's the net difference so that you're only being taxed on the actual net amount that you earned from it, not the gross amount that the total sale was, if that makes sense. Sorry if I am losing people. This is a little complex. Additional income. So this is where like your self-employment income comes into play. So if you are an artist for a living, or if you receive a Twitch payout or anything like that, this is where all your information is going to live. So this is also where it starts to become a person with ADHD's worst nightmare because it says, line 8, additional income from Schedule 1. Okay, let's go to Schedule 1. One of the lines on there will then say self-employment income, see Schedule C. And then we go to Schedule C. So it starts to become a little bit of a, let's go to the next form and then get back to it, and now we're putting the cart before the horse kind of situation. Schedule 1 has a lot of different types of income on it. If you are receiving unemployment benefits or gambling or self-employment, anything like that, there are each individual lines for it on Schedule 1. If you receive income from Twitch or if you sell stuff on eBay, for example, you are generally being given from those companies a Form 1099-K or 1099 NEC for non-employment compensation. That's the form that anybody who did the English commentary for speed-ons from GDQ will be getting one of those shortly so that we can report the income from that, or a 1099 miscellaneous. Those all get kind of accounted for on these forms. The Schedule C kind of can be broken into two parts. Your earnings, so generally that's where like the sale of any artwork or any merchandise or your Twitch payout, like that's where all of that's going to live, and then your expenses. So generally that is money that you spend on that business, and you have to attach a Schedule C for each business you have. So if you sell stuff on eBay, that's a Schedule C. If you receive a Twitch payout as an affiliate or a partner, then that's a separate Schedule C. So your expenses for, say, streaming, for example, like the purchase of supplies, anybody who does receive a Twitch payout, can you please confirm or deny for me whether or not GDQ is accounted for in that? So on Schedule C, there's an expenses part. The cost of GDQ, in theory, should go under expenses. I have been told by some people that's where they are putting it, but I have to double check on that. I'm sorry, I'm technically supposed to be the one providing information on this, but this is something I need to look into a little bit further for folk. It's okay if you don't know, like I said. There are a non-zero amount of people who have filed their taxes like that who have been doing that without issue. I need to confirm that with folks. I apologize. That's the thing. That's something that I should have probably looked into prior to this panel. But like I said, this is going to get updated definitely periodically because, again, like I said, unfortunately, the problem with this being my job and doing this 8 hours a day is that that leaves me with not a whole lot of time to do it for fun. And I would like to be able to do it for fun to help out people. So this is generally where you need to pay attention for like self-employment purposes though. Like I said, sort of ran out of time on posting this, so we'll be updating this with more information later. So now that we've gone through all of the different parts of the income for, we're going to say 2025, for example, but some of this information is pulled from prior years, not from me, but just in general, so we at least have numbers to look at here. So all of it put together, some of those sources of income put together, we've got a total income of $85,689. That's everything on the right-hand column starting with line 1Z. So you're adding all of these up to get this number. So next section, adjustments to income and adjusted gross income. So once you have your total income, that can then be adjusted or reduced by items such as educator expenses, health savings account deductions, and then the deductible part of self-employment tax, and that is once again another ADHD nightmare, going to the Schedule 1 and then the Schedule SE. That is where your self-employment tax lives, again, putting the cart before the horse, because of course the tax filing system is never going to be linear. So we'll talk about the self-employment tax part of it later, but there's a deductible part of the self-employment tax that gets accounted for here. And that then becomes your adjusted gross income. Fun fact about the adjusted gross income, when you file a tax return electronically, oftentimes it will ask you what the prior year adjusted gross income was in order to basically verify that you are who you say you are when you're filing the tax return and you are authorized to electronically file it. If your prior year tax return either has not been filed or has not been finished processing, the answer to that question is 0, because the IRS doesn't have that information yet, so the information electronically is going to be 0. Just if you run into any trouble electronically filing your tax return and that's the rejection it gives you, is that the adjusted gross income is incorrect, just double check and make sure that your prior year return was processed, or if you filed one at all, because if not, then the answer is probably 0. So let's take the adjusted gross income and do more things with it. So standard deduction versus itemized deduction. This is generally how your income is reduced to get to your taxable income. There is a standard number that has been established year over year for each filing status for how much people generally pay in taxes elsewhere, and that is what's considered the standard deduction. People who itemize their deductions would be because like the taxes they end up paying out, like I said, in sorry, words are escaping me today. State and local taxes, charitable contributions, stuff like that. If that totals to be more than what their standard deduction would be for their filing status, then you take the itemized deduction, and that is counted for on Schedule A. So we are once again in ADHD nightmare territory for going to another form. But otherwise, you're generally taking the standard deduction. So for filing single or married filing separately, that's $15,750. So we're going to take that adjusted gross income and subtract that number from it. But also, because we have qualified business income, because you are filing a Scheduled C, that is a qualified business from which you are receiving income, there is a Form 8995 or 8995A, and I hate that I know these off the top of my head. I know they're literally right there, but I am not looking at it when I say that. I am so normal about my job. That will also create an additional deduction for your taxable income, or from your adjusted gross income to become your taxable income. So on top of the standard deduction, you're also getting, if you have qualified business income, so again, that is from self-employment, Schedule C. If for some reason you receive rental income, then you have qualified business income, and then you can receive an additional deduction for that. All of the math for that is on that separate form. Once you have added both the standard deduction and the qualified business income deduction together, that is how much you are reducing your adjusted gross income by. So we started with $83,739 for adjusted gross income. We have a deduction amount of $16,022. So now our taxable income, which is a completely different thing from adjusted gross income and total income, is $67,717. So that is the amount of income on which you are taxed. There are a couple of different ways that your tax liability is calculated. The main one for anybody with income under $100,000 is something called the tax table, which is a real grid that you have to look at with your eyes and find the income dollar amount and find your filing status and go, okay, I make somewhere in this couple $100 range, and this is my filing status. So this is how much tax it is. The 2025 tax table is not published yet, so I used the 2024 tax table for this one so that I could have some number to put here. So if we're doing this based on the 2024 tax table, if you go all the way to wherever it says there's a big headline of $67,000, and then you go to whatever line says, I think it's if you make at least $67,700, but not more than $67,750, then your tax is $9,953. If you make more than $100,000 for your taxable income, there is a whole nother math calculation that you can do, and that is another worksheet on the Form 1040 instructions. Yay. So we have that tax. Amount from Schedule 2, Line 3. That is additional taxes on other things. I should have gotten a Schedule 2 pulled up so I could I'm so sorry. So this is the danger of talking with my hands. And I can look like I'm casting spells, like the spell of knock over the microphone.
You're good.
Cool. Schedule 2 is kind of where a lot of other taxes live, but they're very, very weird cases. And by other taxes, I do not mean self-employment tax. That's a whole other thing. This is also where your non-refundable credits come into play. So there are non-refundable credits and refundable credits. Non-refundable credits can reduce your total tax liability to zero, but not any more than that. So examples of non-refundable credits are things like the child tax credit for other dependents. Usually there's a limited amount that you can reduce your tax by from those credits. So let's say, for example, you have a child tax credit of you have $500 in tax, then you would have the ability to do a child tax credit of $500, and then there is a remaining amount that could generally be available for that tax credit that then turns into the additional child tax credit, and there's a whole other math calculation for that. So non-refundable credits reduces your tax to zero, but it does not create a refund. That is the next one. So also self-employment tax, which is the cart that we put before the horse. Self-employment tax gets taxed separately, so even after your non-refundable credits is when the self-employment tax then gets added, which is why we also had that deductible part of a self-employment tax earlier, because again, things have to be backwards, because of course they do. But then that becomes your total tax, which for this is $10,635. So that $682, that's there. The self-employment tax, this was calculated based on the amount that we talked about earlier for your, for your additional income, or some of this is self-employment income, so it's a percentage of some of that. And then we get to the payments, refundable credits, refund / amount you owe. This is the part where I started to run out of time. I'm sorry. Actually, speaking of time, I'm sorry. Let me double check. Okay. So this is where we go back to if you received a Form W-2 from an employer or a Form 1099 from a number of other sources of income, like your interest, dividends, retirement, stuff like that. Some of those sources will withhold some of your income throughout the year to make payments based on that income for your federal taxes. Usually also state if you pay state income tax. But that is something that's accounted for on those forms as federal tax withheld. So that is the payments that have been made already toward that tax that was owed on here. So far, there's $9,005 that is paid toward that $10,635 tax liability. that's already been paid prior to filing season because of your employer withholding it for you throughout the year. You can also make something called estimated tax payments. So for your sources of income where tax already is not withheld, you may still need to pay taxes on that throughout the year, and we'll talk about this later. Estimated taxes are made quarterly every 3 months to pay for the income that you made during those 3 months. You can make estimated tax payments that way. Once April 15th comes around, you're not owing $1 bajillion on all the income that you made throughout the year. That is a thing that you can do, and we'll talk about it. So with those estimated tax payments that were made throughout 2025, along with the amount that was withheld from an employer, we come to $10,285 for total payments towards, again, that $10,635 tax liability. So not enough money was held throughout the year to pay for the taxes. So what that means is there is a remaining amount left over of $350 that we now have to pay to make up for that difference. Now, if more money was withheld, then if for some reason more money was withheld during the year, or if you had made higher estimated tax payments, that would then result in the tax refund. You may also be eligible for certain refundable credits. So again, the additional child tax credit is one of them, or the earned income credit. If you make below a certain amount of money in earned income, which is generally like your W-2 or self-employment income, but not your investment in dividends, your interest in dividends, then you may be eligible for the earned income credit, which is refundable, and also your eligibility for it can be used based on the fact that you claim a dependent rather than you claiming yourself and your income. And that is accounted for on the Schedule EIC because, again, we are in ADHD purgatory. So definitely worth looking into if you meet the eligibility requirements. There are so many credits out there, and in order for you to determine your eligibility, it depends on so many different factors, and that's why we are not going into them in detail. There are a number of resources, again, that I have posted links to in this slideshow that you can go through these questions to talk about your specific tax situation to see if you are eligible for the credits. At that point, you would claim them, and because they are refundable credits, it will then, if you have tax already owed, so for example, we've got this $350, but you end up having like $1,500 in an additional child tax credit, it'll first reduce your tax to $0, and then you will receive a tax refund of $1,250. But again, A, ran out of time, B, not on the information that I pulled for this return, so not here, sorry. So estimated taxes. Our tax system is technically a pay-as-you-go system. Nobody thinks about that because it's only withheld from your employer if you have an employer through a W-2, and then you get to filing season come April 15th, and if you are self-employed and do not have an employer and you are not withholding the taxes throughout the year on the income you earn, you get to April 15th and you're like, oh shoot, I owe so many taxes, what happened? You can make estimated tax payments, and the IRS might even expect you to be making these estimated tax payments throughout the year depending on how much tax you owe during filing season. So double check your pay stubs, first of all, if you receive a W-2 from an employer. They are supposed to be withholding federal taxes based on your filing status and your income throughout the year. But if they're not, you can tell them to change that. Generally, employers will have their own HR platform where you can just go through a questionnaire to do it, but there is a physical form for it, the Form W-4. There's also a tax withholding estimator on irs.gov that you can plug numbers into to find out what percentage or how much you are supposed to be withholding from your paychecks. So definitely worth looking into if it is not already being done. And I know that it is 2026, and so it's a little bit too late to be doing it for 2025, but this may help you for later filing seasons. For those who historically owe over $1,000 in taxes during filing season, even after all of the payments and credits, the IRS may be expecting to be making estimated taxes throughout the year. The benefit of it being quarterly is that nobody can predict what their income is going to be like for the entire year, especially if you receive your income mostly through like paid gigs and stuff like that. You can go 3 months and go, okay, how much income did I earn in those 3 months? Okay, let's plug that into the tax withholding estimator and see how much in taxes should be owed for your federal taxes for that dollar amount. You can then make an estimated payment before a certain date in order to basically credit that towards how much you are eventually going to owe in taxes for the entire year. And that is something that then when you file your tax return gets accounted for. If you are physically mailing these to the IRS, that is usually done on what's called a Form 1040-ES for estimated payment. So that we know, or the IRS knows, this is the payment is coded differently. It's an estimated tax payment rather than just a normal payment on a balance due, so that the system knows once a tax return is actually posted to that account, that is supposed to be a payment towards the total balance due. There is so much information about the estimated taxes I do not have the time to go through. There's a whole website on it. Again, a billion links in this thing, definitely worth looking into. They explain it way better than I ever could about estimated taxes. It also gives you a list of all the due dates for each estimated tax payment, where you would end up making the final one before April the 15th, when you do eventually end up filing the tax return itself. So super helpful if you didn't already know that, so you're not panicking before filing season about all the income that you earned, that since you needed that money in order to, keep a roof over your head, you weren't able to hold on to it without making payments throughout the year. Definitely worth doing. So refunds, the thing that everybody cares about, the money that you want in your pocket. So just a small pet peeve of mine. A return and the refund are not the same thing. The return is the thing you file. The refund is the money you get if you paid too much money. People know what people mean when you say, oh, I can't wait to get my tax return at the beginning of the year, but just a small distinction. And refunds aren't always a given. Like we talked about, the ideal situation is the IRS does not owe you money and you don't owe the IRS money, because that means that you're getting the correct amount of money throughout the year in income, and it is properly being taxed throughout the year. So you're not losing out on it until April the 15th. But it's basically the refund exists because the IRS said that you owe us this much, or they said you owe us this much money, and you end up handing them a $50 bill instead of $40 that you actually owed, and they say, okay, you gave us too much, here's $10 back. It's honestly as simple as that on paper, technically. If you're requesting the refund be issued via direct deposit, which is going to be a huge focus this year, I know that there's a huge initiative for all federal payments to be issued out to people as a direct deposit, and not everybody has a bank account. So there may be a few delays on people who are not going to be receiving the refund through a direct deposit. So if you are entering information for your direct deposit, please make a billion% sure it's actually accurate, because otherwise what could happen is the IRS will attempt to deposit that direct deposit and there's nothing for it to go to, so the bank will issue it back to the IRS, and then the IRS will then have to flip it to a paper check themselves and then mail it to you. There are also preparers or financial institutions who act kind of as a middleman for your direct deposit, depending on how you are filing. And that's called either a refund anticipation, wow, words are hard today, refund anticipation check, or a loan, or RAC-RAL for short. Generally, if you are filing through platforms like TurboTax, H&R Block, or an independent preparer, they have some financial institution as a middleman where the IRS hands the financial institution that direct deposit money, and then they're the ones that actually direct deposit the refund into your account. So if that is the case, then there may be additional delays if your direct deposit information is wrong. So just make sure it's right. It's very, very specific details that the IRS does not have the power to actually physically change on the return once it's on there. I can't even imagine what it would be like to have actual routing and account number information that IRS employees can go in and change. That would just, that's a whole a whole can of worms that probably should not be opened. So, hold on, what time is it? 7 minutes, okay. So there's a lot of like, how do I do XYZ thing, or help, there's problems, like things don't always happen the way that they're supposed to. So some general information. So if you're trying to file a tax return, there used to be this thing called IRS Direct File. May it rest in peace. I don't know if it's actually coming back this year, where you could just use the IRS's guided tax software to file your tax return rather than filling out the forms lovingly by hand yourself. But generally, once we get to filing season, the IRS will have like a list of supported partners, like who have free tax prep software on their platforms. So I know last year it was like Free Tax USA, TaxSlayer, 1040.com. There were a few others. Some of them you have to meet a income requirement. Some of them actually will also allow you to file your state return for free. So definitely worth like looking at a few of those sites and seeing what is offered to you in terms of like refund / balance due, comparing the differences before you hit the big old file button. Just worth doing because it's free and honestly super helpful. That way you don't have to actually lovingly do all of this like return stuff line by line. You don't actually have to put up with this. It'll actually ask you the questions in ways that make sense. It's great. If you need to get in-person help filing a tax return, there is actually in-person help, like truly and honestly. There's the Volunteer Income Tax Association. It is a free volunteer-based service. There are plenty of community centers all over the United States that are generally open actually during this time, where you can come in. They're not going to file the tax return for you, but they will definitely walk you through like the actual filing process of a tax return. They are IRS certified people who are voluntarily doing this to help people out. There's also the taxpayer assistance centers. These are IRS employees in an in-person office that can help you resolve account issues. So if there's an issue with like a balance due, or if you haven't received your refund, or if you need to order transcripts for your account history or anything like that, or if you, like some of them will even like accept payments if you do have a balance due for your taxes. You can go in, generally appointment only, and do that. Definitely worth looking into. You can find a local office on irs.gov. It's like on the bottom where it says like find a local office or something like that. How do I do? How do you pay a balance due? So usually the easiest way is IRS Direct Pay. That doesn't even require you to log in to irs.gov. Worth having an IRS online account just because it allows you to look at stuff like online account transcripts or pay a balance due. But I also know that that service is held through ID.me, and getting customer service support from them is very slow. So if you have issues logging in, good luck. But IRS Direct Pay does not need you to log in. You can enter your return information. You're going to want to make sure that you select the drop-down menus for like paying a balance due for tax year 2025, for example, and then you can select a dollar amount and even schedule when that comes out, so that you can pay your tax before April the 15th, 2025. You can also send stuff technically through like a check or money order or vanilla Visa if you just have to go to like the local 7-Eleven to pay your taxes. I know that some of those platforms have like service fee charges, so just like be wary of that. You can also change your address, not online, unfortunately. You would have to submit it the old-fashioned way through Form 8022, or if it's like a non-issue where you're not in active correspondence with the IRS and you're just gonna go ahead and change your address on whatever the new tax return you file is. So if you moved recently, or like I did, I moved in May, but I'm just gonna wait until I file my tax return to actually input that new address change on there. We also, like the IRS will generally also pull that information like from the US Postal Service. So if you update it with the post office, more often than not, it gets updated with the IRS as well. That's super important for if you're receiving things like paper checks, because if the post office doesn't have the same address as the IRS and a check comes in under the wrong address, the post office may mark it as undeliverable and mail it back to the IRS, and they'll just delay your refund even further. You can also try calling the IRS service line. Good luck with that. I know that the hold times are generally nightmarish, like an hour or two. So dedicate a day to calling 800-829-1040 and see where that gets you. I do not recommend it. So things go wrong a lot. What time is it? All right, we're going to speed run the end of this. I'm sorry. So generally refunds, if you file electronically, will take about 21 days to get to you, or 6 weeks if you file the paper return. I'm going to give the obvious answer. Double checked where on irs.gov. There's generally a big old thing on the front page that says, "Where's my refund?" The information it gives you is a little bit limited, so it could say processing for several months and not give you any more information than that. You can also double check your account transcripts, because that'll also show you like an actual history of everything that has been input on the account for that tax year. So there will be a line for the actual tax that is assessed, a line for your withholding, a line for the refund that goes out, and a bunch of other account activity like that. Also, double check and make sure that there isn't like a missed comma or something on the return. Like, it happens way more than you would think. And a lot of times that can be something that holds up the processing of a tax return, because the IRS is trying to figure out what the heck that number is that they can't verify. So just double check your return, make sure there's nothing like absolutely egregiously wrong on it, because if there is, you may need to file an amended return, and that may then be the thing that addresses whatever the IRS has a problem with on the return. And that's another thing about, like, if you want to pay the taxes and the balance due isn't showing up on the online account, that'll happen a lot with like if you try to file your 2025 tax return and you have a balance due, it's not going to actually show onto the account until, like, I want to say last year it was like the third week in May or something late like that. Like, obviously later than the actual due date of the return and the balance due. You can make payments through IRS Direct Pay. That way you know for sure that payment is going to get in there before the due date, before it actually shows up on your account. It's something that gets figured when you file your taxes anyway. If you're using tax software, you're generally putting in payment information if you have a balance due, and you can schedule it to be either taken out right away or sometime on or before April the 15th. So just be wary. It might not show up right away, but you still have to pay it by that due date. More stuff. So sometimes if you pay or file late, you could be assessed a penalty. Most of the common penalties are failure to pay or failure to file. You can send in an extension of time to file, which is a Form 4868. You can do that usually online, like on irs.gov itself. It is an extension of time to file, not extension of time to pay. So generally it will give you a 6-month extension till October the 15th to file your tax return, but you still have to pay any tax liability before April the 15th. I know that's kind of backwards, because how are you supposed to know how much you owe for your taxes if you haven't filed your tax return? But c'est la vie, this is the system. If you can establish a history of good compliance, like if you were never assessed a penalty in the last couple of years, sometimes the IRS can do something called a first-time abatement, where they can, as a one-time courtesy, like remove the penalties. The failure to pay penalty will continue to accrue if there's still unpaid tax on the year, but a little relief helps either way. The IRS is legally required to charge interest, so that one is a little bit more difficult to abate. But interest works both ways. So if the IRS does hold on to a refund for longer than they are supposed to, generally what can happen is as soon as that refund does get released, you may find that there's a little bit more on it in interest, and it is assessed the same way interest on a balance due is. I think right now it's like 7 or 8% on a quarterly basis. So just something to think about. So a bunch of forms. What time are we at? Okay, we're 2 minutes over, but it's fine. We ball. Right, we ball, right? We're not paying attention. So there are a lot of forms we didn't get to talk about. They do a billion different things. If your refund was issued but you never received it and it's been over 4 weeks for a direct deposit, you can submit something called a Form 3911, which is claim for a refund. That will basically initiate a trace with the Bureau of the Fiscal Service, who actually issued the check or the direct deposit, to actually find out where that payment went. If it was issued as a check and it wasn't cashed, then they will cancel the check and reissue a new one. If it was cashed, they'll send you a claim packet with information, and then you get to file a claim, and it becomes a whole thing. But it still makes sure that you receive the refund that you are entitled to. If somebody committed identity theft using your social, I'm so sorry that happened, but there is a solution for that. It is the identity theft affidavit, and it takes 1 billion years to process because this happens all the time, and the identity theft victim assistance program is spread very thin. I'm sorry, good luck. The best time to do this would have been when the identity theft happened. The second best time would have been now. So still worth doing. I think last I checked, they are currently processing identity theft affidavits that were received in April of 2024. For a long time, it said October of 2023, so that is progress, even though it doesn't sound like it. So yeah, it's a big yikes, but it's something that unfortunately happens to a lot of people a lot of times, and that is why the time frame is as long as it is. If you want to prevent someone from using your social security number to file a tax return, you can receive what is called an identity protection pin, or an IP pin for short. It is a 6-digit pin that allows you to file the tax return electronically. If you try to electronically file a return using a social without the IP pin, then it will automatically reject it. So super useful for you or your dependents if you want to make sure nobody tries to either file a return under your social or claim your dependents if they are not eligible to do it. If you just need tax information and you can't get it on your account transcripts or anything like that, there is a form for that as well. There's the form 4506 or the form 506-T. One of them you have to pay money for, but if the IRS can't find the information you're looking for, you will get refunded for it. Generally, that is for tax information that is like up to 10 years back. So usually it's stuff that's not existing live on your online account. So it kind of takes a little bit of time / effort / money to get people's hands on it. If you need tax information for a deceased person, if for some reason the responsibility of filing a tax return for a deceased loved one has been thrust upon you, first of all, so sorry for your loss. I'm sorry that you have to deal with that on top of everything else that you have to deal with. But there are many forms that give different forms of authorization for you and being able to get their affairs in order. So Form 56, if there's no court documents that say, hey, you have some sort of fiduciary relationship with this person, so you are somebody that can be talked to about their affairs. There's Form 1310 if you're trying to claim a refund for a deceased taxpayer. Again, going back to that whole, if there is a refund for a deceased person, you want to make sure it actually goes into the correct name. If you don't have like an estate account that it goes into, so like if you need for it to be in your name or to your address, that's the form you're going to want to send. Form 2848 for a POA after death, because before death and after death, the IRS does make a distinction for a power of attorney. That way, somebody can act on the taxpayer's behalf as if they were the taxpayer and make changes to the account as if they were the taxpayer. And again, 4506/4506-T if you want to receive actual tax transcripts. But just be aware that if you need to submit those forms, the IRS is going to need some of those other forms first. So some of them you're going to have to send all at once to the same place. So it's a lot, but there is actually like a whole really nice page about all of this that I also link to later on. If you don't have a social, but you're required to file a tax return, you need to get what's called an ITIN, or an individual taxpayer identification number. You apply for that by filing your Form 1040 and a W-7 at the same time, and then the Form W-7 goes to the, I almost said, so the acronym is USCIS, which is the United States Center for Immigration Services, but I keep referring it to my head as US cisgender. So just go to the United States cisgender website to file your Form W-7. Yeah, sorry, only cis people can apply for this. That is a joke for legal reasons, I have to say that. So yeah, when I wrote this, I had all this off the top of my head because this is just stuff I talk about all the time because I'm incredibly normal about my job. Also, I pulled this literally from like my Cliff's Notes of everything that I submitted before this panel even became accepted, of like, here's what I'm going to talk about. And somehow they accepted this based on that and a few other things that are unhinged. So sources. That's the actual ketchup packets that all of the sauces that were sent to me. Thank you, Cubs, for feeding me while I was doing all of this. I'm going to go through these real quick, and some of these are actually hidden in the slideshow function of this because, again, incomplete, but it's also walls of links, so I didn't want to overwhelm everybody. Lots of general information here. All of the form instructions, definitely worth going through. They are web pages, so you can Control-F your way through them to find certain search terms that are relevant to whatever the heck you're trying to do with your tax return. There's also something called the Taxpayer Advocate Services, where if you are trying to resolve an issue with the IRS and it is taking either longer than it is supposed to, or you're experiencing some sort of financial hardship, the Taxpayer Advocate Services is a independent unit within the IRS that helps resolve taxpayer issues. They have a really good website, but also a really good roadmap, which is even more unhinged than this entire slideshow that gives like every possible thing that could happen with your tax return based on like where you are starting and what forms you've received and so on and so forth, whatever. Still worth looking at if you know where to start, because it's like it's a gigantic flow chart. So if you're a visual person, definitely worth looking at. The Interactive Tax Assistant, like I said, it answers a ton of tax law questions. So like, am I even required to file? What's my filing status? Who can I claim as a dependent? Am I eligible for the earned income credit? All that stuff can be answered by the Interactive Tax Assistant. It asks you a bunch of questions depending on your tax situation, because again, a lot of answers to that is, it depends. And you probably want a better answer than it depends. So that's that for you. There's also the IRS Processing Status Dashboard. That's where you can look at the Form 14039 that's currently being processed from April 2024. But it'll also tell you like a nice little snapshot of like what forms the IRS is processing and when they received them. So like if you sent in a paper Form 1040 and for some reason it's not showing up on the site yet, like on your personal online account for your specific status, this is a good thing to check. So if they haven't even gotten to the tax returns that were mailed in and received by the IRS in, say, January, like if it still says November or December of last year, then that's probably why there's been nothing input electronically about your return yet. So just a way to maintain your sanity if you still don't see anything about your return yet. Some miscellaneous stuff, like I said, tax withholding estimator, the identity theft guide, which is really good if God forbid something happens to your social security number. It gives you a list to also some external sources if there's non-tax related identity theft, where like somebody applied for a job using your social or stuff like that. Some really good information for people who are trying to file a tax return for a decedent, which is a deceased taxpayer. Not pronounced decadent. It's spelled D-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. Also, like if returns are held up by the exam department, your rights to an appeal, because you do have rights before the Internal Revenue Service as a taxpayer. It may not feel like it sometimes, but you do. There is a whole taxpayer bill of rights, and that is also linked in here somewhere. This is something called the IRM. This is the Internal Revenue Manual. There we go. That's the acronym. This is actually a public-facing version of the resource materials that IRS employees use. So some of these may be worded as if you are an IRS employee, and I do not expect people to understand what half of this even says, but it's still really nice information to have if you want to do some light reading. There's even more. There's also a massive one about just like the whole submission process of when a processing center actually receives a tax return. That's kind of nice to look at, just so you can actually like see the life of a tax return and what information is on it, how it gets processed. So we went over time, and I'm sorry, and this is exactly what I mentioned. If you have any questions, we don't have time, but I have a whole form for it. There's a link to it. I'm also going to be posting this on Blue Sky because I do not expect people to manually type this into their address bar on their phone. You can take a picture of it if you want, but I am going to be posting this on Blue Sky so that I can answer questions. Like I said to you, this is something that I wish that I had made more finished sooner, but this is the nature of the fact that I do this for 8 hours a day. I can't do 8 hours of this for work and then 8 hours of this for fun afterwards. It's a little bit difficult to do that. So I do plan on updating this as best as I can, and I also plan on making like a living document of everyone's questions and my answers to them, especially if some of them require some additional research, because everybody's situation is different. And again, I am not going to tell you how to file your tax return, but I know there's a lot of really odd out there issues and a lot of things I did not go over that I would like to be able to address for people. So like, please ask me, even if the answer to that is initially, I don't know, let's find out, because I do want to find out. Like, it's worth looking into. I want to be able to help people as best as I can. I may want to follow up with people privately to ask clarifying questions, because again, sometimes the answer to things is it depends. So if I can get a clear answer for you, then I would like to. There's a bunch of information about it on the form itself. Feel free to follow me, because I will be posting a link both to the slideshow and to the form for questions itself after this, so that you can follow up. And that's it. Thank you. Sorry for going 13 minutes over. Like I said, I do this for 8 hours a day.